This call is being recorded.
Powered by Riverside FM.
Welcome to Nighthawk Radio. We're blessed enough to have a guest all the way from Alabama. How are you doing tonight, Joe?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Some technical difficulties, but we're doing good now, bro.
Yeah, it seems to be the way it is with technology. If it's gonna fail, it will.
That's true, man. And you're a Bigfoot hunter, right, brother?
Yes, sir.
Talk about some
Yeah,
of your adventures as a Bigfoot hunter.
I've been looking for Bigfoot for 20 years this year. Uh, Whenever I first started, I wasn't even Bigfoot wasn't even in the mindset. I wasn't a believer. I didn't know. I didn't give it two thoughts. You know, I grew up northwest Alabama and south central Tennessee. It's common. Everybody, grandparents tell you, in the country, get home before it gets dark, or a booger will get you, or something to that effect. Well, we'll go forward to 2005. I was working down in Evadale, Texas, at a paper mill, and we just got past Hurricane Katrina and was getting ready for Hurricane Rita, and I was a patrol guard at the paper mill, and it was my job to make sure that everything was uh, locked down, all the gates that wasn't normally used. I had to go around checking and seeing if they were open or closed, and this, that, and the other, normal stuff. And I was down there. Evadale, Texas, is a paper mill town. The paper mill owns everything property wise around it, and Evadale High School is one of the things the paper mill has a big influence on. So while I was out doing my stuff, I stopped in and was asked to check on Evadale High School, make sure their gym doors were closed. So I went down there and I was checking them out. And anybody that doesn't know, Evadale High School is right on the Natchez River down there. And so I was walking down at the gym checking out the doors, and I heard something going, and it was real quiet. And I I hadn't been down there very long, and I thought this must be some kind of bird or something. And because I am a hunter, I'm not a Bigfoot researcher. I'm just a hunter, and I just moved down there from northwest Alabama, and I'm like, I'm gonna see what kind of bird that is, because that sounds almost like a monkey. And so I got down there and I walked down to the a river down there, and that year in 2005, the Natchez River was dropped probably 10, 12 feet in some places, and at this spot that there was a bank where the river had dropped that was 10 feet and 3 inches, and I know that because I went back and I measured it later, but as I was walking up to the river, I wasn't being quiet. I was just looking, because whatever it was making so much noise. It didn't care if anybody heard it or not. And I was thinking, well, it's got to be some kind of bird. That's the only thing I could figure. And I walked up to the edge of the river there, and I looked down, and I saw facing away from me, squatted down, what I thought was a bear. That's the only thing my mind went to then. And I sitting there thinking, there's not any bears in Southeast Texas. I don't know what that is. But it's got to be a bear. And it turned its head slightly, and I saw its ear on the side of its head. It looked like a primate ear. And I said, yeah, that ain't no bear. And I was backing up. I was going to leave, and it turned and looked at me with its head a little bit, and then it turned its whole waist and looked over there at me. And when I seen it, it looked like a cross between a gorilla and an orangutan. And it stood up, and it turned around and it faced me. And I looked at the truck that I drove, and it was about 200 feet away. I looked at it, and it was about 90 feet away. And I was thinking, well, if this thing's going to get me, it's going to get me. And I said, I'm probably never going to see anything else like this again in my life. So I sat there and I watched it. And it stood up and turned facing me, like I said, and it watched me. And I would look at the truck and back at it, and it would look across the river and then look back at me. And its facial expressions was mirroring what I was thinking. It's like, how am I going to get out of this? And it never was aggressive. It'll stop. It stopped its little humming or whatever it was doing whenever it stood up. And we sat there and looked at each other for about 10 minutes. And he would look at me, and he'd drop his eyes to the water, and then he would look up at me again, and then he would look across the river, and then he would drop his head. And while he was doing that, I was looking at him, and then when we locked eyes, I would drop my eyes to the ground and look at the truck. And it was like we were both trying to decide how we're going to get out of this situation. And it didn't look like it wanted to be seen any more than I wanted to be seen by it. So after a little while, it walked backwards into the water till it got about waist deep. And it turned around, and it started walking across the Neches River, and it went kind of like in a zigzag way. But when it got across the river, it climbed up that bank, and it took off to the west. And I would have thought that an animal that big would have made enough noise that it'd be breaking limbs and stuff, and I would have heard it running off. But it was quiet. You wouldn't even know it was there from across the river if you didn't sit there and watch it. And so, me being a hunter, I decided, well, if these things are down here, and I'm thinking this is some kind of escaped animal from Hurricane Katrina, or maybe a zoo somewhere in Louisiana had something get out. And I'm thinking, if that's down here, I'm going to need to tell somebody. So I went back to my guard post, and I asked my supervisor. I said, have there been any reports of any zoo animals or anything that's got out from Hurricane Katrina? And he kind of laughed at me. He said, no, not that I know of. Why? And I said, well, I just seen some kind of big old ape-looking thing at down at the river. He said, what does it look like? I said, well, it had the color of an orangutan, and it was just big. It looked like a big old gorilla. That's the best thing I could describe it looked like. And he laughed at me. He said, no, I don't know what you've been drinking, but save me some. And so we, after that, I didn't think much of it. I went out and did my regular routes and all. They had several water wells that was in different parts of the swamp that fed the paper mill. And I was always going around and checking places, and I had scan points I had to do to prove that I was there. And that next day, that was on a Friday, if I remember right. Maybe a Saturday. Anyway, on Sundays, I called my grandmother back in northwest Alabama, and I'd tell her about my week and stuff. And so I called her that next time, and I was like, you ain't going to believe what I saw down here in the water. And we got to talking about it. She said, oh, you saw a booger. I said, a booger? She said, yeah, a Bigfoot. She said, they won't hurt you. Just leave them alone. And so from then on, when I understood that they were real because I saw one, not because I believed in them. It's because I saw one. And at that point, I was still a pretty active hunter, and I got to thinking, well, I need to figure out what kind of animal this is. What if I'm wrist deep in a gut pile or something, and one shows up? Is it going to try to take my deer or my hog, or is it going to try to take me? Is it going to try to wait till I'm gone and just want the gut pile? What? So that was my motivation for looking for these things. And I didn't know anybody that was interested in it. I didn't know anybody that even cared about it. And the people that I talked to about it, most of them would laugh at me and tell me I was crazy. And but some of the older guys I knew down there, they'd be like, "Yeah, they're out here, but people gonna laugh at you if you tell them." And so I learned what to look for, and then I started trying to find them, and I had a guy tell me, say, "Look, why don't you go on the internet and look up Bigfoot stuff, and it might help you." So I did go on the internet, and I looked where they talked about the tree twist and the tree structures and stuff. So I would go to places that I was familiar with from hunting there so much. I would go, and instead of hunting, I started looking for these signs in the area, and that's how I got started. If I found an area that had say a tree twist on it, back then I was ignorant as green as a goose, I guess they used to say, but I would go find one of those trees, and I would sit and I'd watch that tree. And if I didn't see nothing there, I would sit back and walk around a little bit area or whatever. And I never tried to make myself like I was sneaking around. I made it obvious I was there. I was loud. I would go and camp in these areas, and I would whistle and make noise, and I'd play my radio, and I'd cook my food, and it seemed like when I do that, at night, whenever it got quiet, I would have a nighttime visitor or two that would come up and check out my camp. So from there, it was just a learning process to get to where I am today. And I'm still learning. I'm not an expert, but I have learned from real life experiences.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's an expert in this field.
No, well, I think there are experts on them, but they're government employees who aren't going to share what they know. I think the military knows what they are because they let them have free range on their top secret military bases. So I've talked with several MPs in the Army that's had experiences with them over the year, and all of them told me that they were just told, whatever you do, don't shoot at them, don't be aggressive. They'll leave you alone. Oh, whether it's an animal or an archaic human, I can't say. My brain has gone back and forth to, you think you got it figured out, and then something happens where you realize I don't know nothing about these things from what I thought they were. And it seems like every one of them is as unique as people are. You can't stereotype people uh, like you can say a deer or a hog or coyotes or squirrels or anything like that. If you hunt long enough, you can see a pattern and know if it does this, then it'll do this. Or if you see a tree rub there, you know that deer's going to come back and check on it to see if another deer's there. Well, I've never been able to pattern a Sasquatch on things. They do stuff and it's completely different than what you would think just a normal animal is. But I do think there's in blood animals. I don't think there's this woo stuff to it. In 20 years, I haven't had any experience that's told me that. Now, I have friends who have seriously told me that they've come across those experiences, but I can't attest to it because I haven't seen it myself. That makes sense.
So what on the hunts that people have got you on? What have they experienced? If you can share.
Well, I started out with a guy that I work with. Uh, people now seem to call me in and they try to figure this stuff out. But he had a farm down there in southeast Texas that had cows in it. And whenever he would put his sweet feed up in a crib, even if he locked the door, the lock would be ripped off of it, and he would come up, his sweet feed would be gone. And so one day we were talking at work about something else, and he brought up the subject. He said, "You know, I'm not crazy. They tell me that you've seen these big old ape-looking things in the woods down here." I said, "Yeah, I've seen one." I told him, like I just told y'all what I saw. And he is like, "Well, I think I got one stealing sweet corn." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah." He said, "That sweet feed comes up missing 4 or 5 bags a week some weeks." And I said, "Well, why don't we video one and see what we can see if it ain't somebody else stealing your stuff and you just thinking that." He's like, "No, there's footprints around." He said, "Unless it's a big old barefooted guy walking around," said it's not a person. So we went and we put up one of those old trail cameras, looked like a big old box, in the top of his barn facing down where his sweet feed was, and he replaced the lock on his sweet feed bin, and he had his tractor pulled in there, parked out in the breezeway in the barn there, and he called me about 5 6 days later. He said, "I got something I want you to see." And I went down there, and he had it on video where that thing walked in on 4 legs and walked around his tractor and was smelling around. And the only thing I can figure out is it heard the camera clicking over because it had those old cassette tapes in it. And they heard it clicking, and he started looking around for whatever that clicking was. He couldn't find it. And so after he looked around the tractor, he got up underneath the tractor and rubbed his hand on the differential in the tractor and smelt the grease on it, licked it. And then he went over there and took his hand and grabbed the lock and pulled the lock off the door. And this wasn't a flimsy door. It was made out of 2x6s in the barn, and he ripped the whole lock mechanism off of it. He went in there and he got him a bag of sweet feed and held it under his arms like a sack of taters, and walked off on 2 legs. And so we watched that, and I guess we spent probably 3 4 hours just watching that little old 10-minute tape. And I finally said, "I'd like to have a copy of that." He's like, "Nope." He said, "I'm going to keep this. I'm going to show this to my kids and my grandkids and tell them what's out there in the pasture." He said, "And that's as far as I'm going with it." I said, "Well, some people would be interested in watching that." He said, "Listen, there's so many people laughing and telling people they crazy for seeing these things. I don't have any positive reason for sharing it with anybody." He said, "I'm showing it to you because it was your idea to put the video camera up there." And so that was the first time I got to see one on video. And then he had a neighbor that we never caught him on video, but he would go out there and steal his salt blocks out there in his field, and he would whenever they would come up missing, you'd never see the salt block again. But whenever you went out there where the salt block was, you might find a handful of nuts or like hickory nuts or pecans or something set down where that salt block was. And I don't know anything that can tote off a salt block that ain't got hands. But just there's been that was back in the early days, and I've watched them. Like I said, I've spent my life just going around doing my thing, watching them and learning from them, so that I know how to act when I come across one in the woods. We had a couple. I had a black couple. They were older couple in Central Alabama called me one time, and they were having problem with their garden. Right before the stuff was ready to be harvested in the year, something would come in and take all the stuff out. And got to looking around and checking on it, and we found a footprint down there that I thought was Sasquatch doing it. And the older guy thought it was his two nephews and one of his brother-in-law stealing his crops out of his yard. And I told him, I said, listen, if this is a food source, they'll probably fight you over at food source. I said, it ain't nothing that if they're gonna, you can just run them off. You can talk to them, whatever, like people say, but you're gonna have to plant them a garden. Would be the only thing I could think. And that old guy, that next year, did that in the spring. He went out about 40 yards past his garden in the woods and tilled up an area probably, I guess, a quarter acre big with his tiller and his tractor. And he put stuff out there, and he said, "This is y'all's." He told me later, he hollered out in the woods and said, "This is y'all's." And he pointed at his garden. He said, "That's mine." And he left it there. He never went back and picked nothing out of it. Or they didn't tend the garden like he tended his. And that next fall, at different times, his wife would find fruit like tomatoes or watermelons or cantaloupes or something on her back porch, and she would say it was the Sasquatch bringing it up there, because she would see muddy handprints next to it where they set it down on the porch, and they touched the porch with their hands. I've had them tell me about that, and we had a couple, and a guy and his wife called me, and they were coming around the house. They were slapping the house, throwing stuff on the roof, and they were scared. They were almost to the point of leaving, and he contacted me through a friend of mine, and he's like, "Do you really think you can do anything about this?" I was like, "I don't know." And so, make a long story short, I got in his barn, and I stayed in his barn, and I watched, and it was juveniles that would come up, and there was 4 of them, and one of them, for example, would go up, and they would slap the fence in his front yard. Well, they didn't hear that in the house, but he would run back to the woods, and there was another one that would run through the fence, and he would hit the front porch and slap the front porch, and then he would run back. And then another one ran up, and he slapped the house, and he'd sit there and listen to see if they heard him, and then he would run off. And that was the point where the guy was hearing things when they started slapping on the house. And the other one, he would be throwing rocks and hitting the roof. The roof was metal, and the rocks would roll down. And they thought that this was one individual that was doing all this harassing, when it was a group of younger ones that was just out doing shenanigans, I guess, being like adolescents do. And so we watched that one night, and I was on the phone with him. I was telling him what to do. And they come down the back side of the barn, and I was in a hayloft up there with the door open, and when I was watching them, they come around the back side of the barn, and they walked in through the breezeway, and I cleared my throat like that right there, and they looked up, and they ran out the back of the barn. And the guy was on the phone. He's like, "What's that noise?" He could hear it in the house. They were making all kind of monkey noise, sound like gorillas. You'd think that it was a fight going on out there, but they was fighting each other to get back in the woods. And so I told him, I said, "Listen, these are adolescents, and the reason why I say this is because they're going up and slapping the house and running off." I said, if this was a grown-up alpha male who was trying to dominate you, he would just break the door down and go in, and he would do whatever he would do then. I said, but these, in my opinion, they're younger ones. What, none of them over 6.5 feet tall, so they weren't grown up. And I said, listen, you go out there, you hear them hollering or whatever, you go out there and tell them to shut up, you're going to get their daddy out here. I said, it sounds stupid, but that's all I think of. And if they're smart as people say they are, they'll understand what you're saying. And I do believe they understand language. I'm not sure they can speak like we do, but they understand. And the way I know that is I was watching one over in Cedar Creek Reservoir in North Alabama, and it was sitting down there eating, and I was like, I wonder, thinking in my head, I wonder if this thing can understand me. And I just hollered at it, and I said, hey, look at me when I'm talking to you. And it looked up at me and then dropped its head down when it seen me looking at it. So I think they understand more than they put on that they do. And anyway, getting back to my story, that guy went out there, and they were slapping on the house, and he opened up the door and went out with his shotgun, and told them, said, listen, y'all get out of here. I'm going to call y'all's daddy. That's what he told me. He told them. He said, and they run off, and they stayed gone for a week. He said when they come back, it wasn't no more slapping on the house. It was rocks thrown on the roof. He said, I can deal with that. He said, it's just aggravating it, but it's like kids, ain't it? I said, pretty much. You got 3 or 4 little bullies running around. That's not so much, I don't think, doing meanness to be doing it, but they're just bored and they're looking for annex. I said, just like if you were out here and you were with your buddies, and y'all might see a possum in the road or something, y'all might get out and go poke that possum, look at it and everything. You don't mean no meanness by it, but to that possum, he could be scared to death because you got 4 of y'all out there, and he don't know if you're going to kill him or not. I said, in this situation, you're pretty much like the possum. And he said, I think I understand what you're saying. And so they ended up staying in their property, and I hadn't heard from him in 4 or 5 years, but the last I heard, he still had them on his property, but it was where they could coexist.
Yeah, that's some awesome stories, man. And what I got from that was you talking about like Bigfoot, like giving gifts back to people. There's a lot of stories of Bigfoot giving stuff back to Native Americans after Native Americans leave them like food and stuff.
Right. Yeah. I I don't agree with associating yourself with food with them, and the reason is, you know, if they get used to that, they're an apex predator. They've survived their whole life without any help. They don't need it. But they're just like anybody else. If you're going to give them something, give them an easy meal, they're going to take it. But if they get used to that easy meal and you quit giving it to them, uh, they're going to go find another person and expect that same easy meal. And if that other person don't understand what they're doing, that could be terrifying for that person. And it could cause a lot of grief, and a lot of miscommunication could lead to a lot of aggressive encounters between them. And that's the reason why I say don't never feed them, don't never trade with them, because if you still give them stuff all the wants to say that they're going to say, well, I get this Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm going to go Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday and see if I can find this somewhere else. And not everybody that sees them as a positive thing. And some people see them as monsters and they're terrified of them. And it's something that ain't supposed to be there, according to what we've always been told. But a different part of the country has different stories about it. Like down here, you'll hear in Alabama, for example, you'll hear about the white thing. Oh, that's supposed to be a white Bigfoot-like entity. Or you'll hear about boogers or booger bears or the booger man. Oh, all these things are. When I was little, I was always told by my grandma they weren't real. The same grandma that told me, "Oh, you saw a booger," by the way. But well, after I got grown and I told her I saw one, she's like, "Well, we knew they were around, but we also knew that they wouldn't hurt you if you didn't hurt them, and we just didn't want y'all to be afraid to play in the woods because y'all was safe there." And their property was 1,500 acres, so they had plenty of room for everybody to get along, I guess. But different parts of the country, they have different views on them. Just like different Native American tribes, they have different views of them, and it just depends on where you're at, I guess, of what your view of them would be. But for me, I don't see them as anything more than another primate. Oh, you get around a gorilla that's 5 foot tall, and he gets mad, he'd tear you up. You get around one of these things that's 8 foot tall, strong as a gorilla. You ain't gonna be heard of anymore. They ain't gonna just tear you up. They'll probably tear you up and eat you. They have that ability, but that doesn't mean they always have that will. Um, and I do think that they have their own ideas on life and death and how to dispose with their bodies and things. But that's that's a point of contention with a lot of people, and I try to stay away from that.
Yeah. Well, I definitely appreciate you being on, Joe.
Hey, no problem. I'm glad you called, and I appreciate you letting me have the opportunity to talk with you a little while.
Yes, sir. I want to thank Bigfoot Hunter Joe for being on. I want to thank everybody that's liked and subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, everything. We're now on Live 365 Nighthawk Radio. Everybody have a good night and God bless.